What's up, everybody? Welcome to The Conversation, a Crosspoint City Young Adults podcast created to help young adults have conversations about Jesus and what it looks like to follow him. My name is Darian, and we've got Carlos here.
What up, y'all?
Y'all, it's hot. It's like 90 degrees out today.
Oh, I thought you meant in here. I was
Oh, no, it feels
it's
great
not
in
hot
here.
in here. If you think it's hot in here,
Listen, sugar
you
melts.
gotta go to the
okay?
doctor, bro.
I was
you
melting.
tripping. Okay.
Anyways, let's talk about this young adult gathering.
Yeah.
And just talking about how do we love like Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
I know you guys had kind of talked about it last episode, but I wanted to just, if we could, quickly circle back to just a social media post that went viral that you shared about, I don't know who it was, you may have said it, but somebody...
Yeah, so it was really a pastor. I was watching their sermon, and they were talking about this post, and then I Googled it, and it was on TikTok, and it was a social media post about a guy who would walk around the city and ask the question, do your Christian friends look different? And then person after person, interview after interview, they pretty much said, no, they're just like me. And so...
Yeah, when you had shared that, I kind of asked myself, I'm like, okay, why is that so common? Mm-hmm. And then as I was processing that, it just made me kind of think, is it a fear thing or is it a lack of discipleship? And it made me think of the passage in Matthew 7 with like Sermon on the Mount where Jesus is talking about this distinction between true and false disciples. Mm-hmm. And he says, not everyone who says to me will say, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom, but only the one who does the will of my Father. And then in James 2, where it just says in the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead.
Yeah.
So I don't know. How do you kind of discern if it's a lack of discipleship being the reason you look like the world or just being you're afraid of the world?
I think it's both. And I think in seasons for the believer, it is something that they struggle with, you know, just thinking when I was a young believer, a young follower of Jesus, I was afraid that my friends would judge me or say something about me behind my back. And that is what happened. When I became a Christian, I had to start saying no to things. And so my friends at the time started to stop asking me to come hang out because I was the party pooper and all this stuff.
Not the party pooper.
I know, because I didn't want to go do that or go hang out with them there and stuff like that. And so they started to say, you know, kind of like create some distance between me and them. And I think, so there's just a little bit of fear. Like you're scared what's going to happen and it will cost you something. Like you have to understand that your relationship with Jesus will cost you something in the world. I don't know what that's going to be. For everyone, it's kind of different. I would say it will affect your relationships. It'll affect your habits, the way you spend your time, the way you spend your money, the way you do things, the way you think about things. It's going to affect everything you do because Jesus calls all of you, right? And so I do think that. But then also I think it's a lack of discipleship. I think a lot of people do not know what to do after they become a Christian. I remember when I became a Christian and surrendered my life to Jesus, I was at student camp. I remember the guy saying, hey, if you believe in Jesus and you gave your life, stand up. And I remember standing up. My best friend was with me and he stood up and we're like, this is amazing. Yeah. And then we went back home. And we had this new life, but old habits. And so I think a lot of people haven't taught us how to navigate the new relationship that we have with Jesus. They haven't taught us how to pray. They haven't taught us how to read our Bible. They haven't taught us like what it really looks like, you know? And so we have, as a generation, have just stumbled along it, like trying to figure it out on our own. And I think that makes it like there's like a season in our life where we struggle to do that.
Right.
And so that's why discipleship is so stinking important. And as you walk with somebody, they're going to teach you how to live differently. It's crazy. I think there was a book that I was reading about like just generations, and like there was a generation in the past that just wanted you to teach them how to do it. Then the next generation wanted you to tell them how to do it. And then now we're back into the generation that they want us to tell us. We want them to tell us how to do it, but also to show us how to do it.
Yeah. Well, and as you're saying that, it's even making me think we have a level of ownership in our own discipleship. Like, obviously, you don't know what you don't know, but are we also proactively seeking to be discipled? Because I remember there's a season of my life where I was just living in sin, but wanting to get close to Jesus, and then I just felt like the Lord convicted me of like, well, you're not even in godly community. Like, you don't have people holding you accountable. And so it wasn't until I got into a small group and started getting into scripture that I feel like that's whenever I had the boldness to do what the Lord was calling me.
Yeah. No, to add to that would be, we live in an age where you have at your fingertips so much information, that you have so much great teaching and great access and resources to so many godly things and Christian writing, that you have no excuse.
Yeah.
And I think about it when I wanted to learn how to play basketball and I wanted to get better as a basketball player. Like, I sought people out. Like, I went to the gym. I would go play at different spots. Like, I got with people who were better than me. I'd work out with them. Like, I did all these things because I desired to get better. And I think the same thing is connected to our faith. Like, if you want to be more like Jesus, then you will take ownership of that. I think we're always waiting for people to invite us in. And what I've realized is, I can't wait for people. Like, this is so important that if I want to learn, I'm going to go look it up. I'm going to go ask somebody. And it sounds bad, but I'm going to self-invite myself to things that I probably shouldn't be at. But I'm going to be in the corner, and I'm going to try to learn and listen as much as I can. But you have to take ownership of your relationship with Jesus.
Well, and as you're saying that, it just makes me think of a lot of not every story in the gospel, but a lot of them. Like, I think of Zacchaeus. He was chasing after Jesus. I think of the woman who was bleeding for 12 years. Like, she was pursuing Jesus. Like, I just think of a lot of these New Testament and gospel scenarios where, like, they were the ones who were, like, seeking truth. Obviously, there are times where I think the Lord's chasing us down, because I just think of my own story where the Lord definitely chased me down and pursued me. But there's also this intentionality on our end to receive the way that he can pursue us. And we also have to, in turn, like, pursue him.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think Jesus intentionally went after us. So just like, I think those stories that you're using, like Zacchaeus, like Jesus went up to Zacchaeus, but for Zacchaeus to go deeper, he's the one that did these things, right? Obviously, the woman that was bleeding for 12 years, she went up to Jesus, but it's because she heard Jesus, right? And so I think, but they took ownership on their own. They said, I cannot sit back and wait. And I think we can learn a lesson, like, you can't sit back and wait. You're waiting for people to help you out on these things and to teach you, but to be honest, my question to you would be, like, if I want you to be an owner of your faith, I would ask you, like, who have you asked in the last, 2 to 3 weeks to teach you something about the Lord? Like, when's the last time you asked somebody, hey, teach me how to pray? Like, you heard them pray and you're like, dude, I just feel like you have a connection with God. Can you teach me how to do that? Or I feel like you just have great insights. How do you do that? Like, how do you spend time? And what is your quiet time and your quality time with God? What does that look like? Like, you going up to somebody who you think is a godly person and just saying, hey, could you teach me, like, how to do that? And I remember James saying in our staff meeting, so people who don't go to our church, James is our pastor. Pastor James was talking about that you need to go up to somebody and ask them to be your mentor. People aren't really, like, knocking at your door and say, hey, can I mentor you? So I think you need to take ownership of that. But I do think we look like the world because we haven't been discipled. When I was doing the sermon for prayer for young adults, I would ask people, who taught you how to pray?
Yeah.
And I don't think any single person told me it was because of their parents or it was because somebody, like, sat them down. And so, we look like the world because nobody has taught us differently. Like, we're being discipled by TikTok and by Instagram and by everything we watch. And so no one's coming alongside us and saying, hey, let me help you. And so that's why, that's what the whole idea of the conversation is. This podcast is to come alongside you and to teach you about the things that are gathering. Everything we do at church is about discipleship. We want to teach you how to live a life that reflects your relationship with Jesus, and we obviously we want you to be more like him. And
And you had made a point too during the young adult gathering on Tuesday, just how the importance of we cannot live like the world and then expect people to turn in faith to Jesus.
Yeah.
Do you want to kind of elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, if you just can't expect the world to be like, I want what you got. If you look just like them, if you're as hopeless as they are, as depressed as they are, as anxious as they are, like why would our faith be attracted to them if when we struggle, we look just like them, And I just think that if you want them to be attracted to Jesus, right, you just have to live differently. Like, and that's actually what happened in my life. I remember my mentor, when I first started working for him, he asked me if I wanted to be like a coach or a referee at like Upward and stuff. And he just lived such a different life that it was so intriguing that I had questions.
Yeah.
He had different views on, drinking and having sex before marriage and all these things. And they were just so bizarre to me because I was so in the world. And so it was just counterculture. But you know what he had that everybody didn't? He was so hopeful. He had a joy that I was just like, man, and he had a peace about things. And when I talked to him, it was just different. And I remember asking him when I was walking, like we were walking up the field to set up the soccer, like put the soccer goals out and I'll do all this stuff. And just ask him like, dude, what's so different about you? And then he gave me the answer. He's Jesus.
Yeah.
And I'm like, Jesus, what in the world? And then he was able to elaborate on that and just really walk with me and tell me like why it was different. But I could tell that something was different about him.
Right. I mean, why follow Jesus if there's nothing better? Like if he doesn't have anything better to offer us.
Yeah.
And I mean, he has that freedom to offer us. And you had talked about how we have to be different, we have to live different, and we have to love differently. And as you were sharing that, it just made me think this is an internal change that leads to an external lifestyle.
Oh, yeah.
And so I just really loved how you started with that we have to be different, to then live different, to then love different.
Yeah. Well, we have to understand that this is not about behavior modification. This is about life transformation.
Yeah.
Like we are trying to work from the inside out. And that's why a lot of people, they're trying to change the behaviors before they change their heart. And that's why it's not working.
Right.
That's why they can't do things longer than 3 weeks or a month or so. It's because their heart hasn't changed. And so I think for us, when your heart changes, your behaviors will follow.
Right.
And it might take some time. Some behaviors will be instant. Other behaviors, it'll take, maybe a month or two, maybe even a year. But if your heart changes, you no longer want to do those things that you used to do.
Yeah.
Right. And I just think that's what happens with maturity. What does Paul say? Like when I was a child, I thought like a child, played like a child, but when I became a man, I put away my childish ways. And that's because there was just like this inner thing that happened inside his heart and his mind that changed all this stuff. And I think for us, that's why we need to put ourselves in environments where the Lord can operate on our heart. That's why it's so important to read your Bible and to pray and be in godly community, because all those times where you get exposed to God and his spirit and his teaching and truth, it begins to operate on your heart. It begins to change it from the inside out. And then those things that you struggle with, the things that you don't want to do and you shouldn't do, you start to stop doing them,
Yeah, and I mean, you kind of had touched on how do you begin this internal change? And you had named, prayer, time with the Lord, godly community. But I love how in the sermon you also talked about one of the ways we can begin this internal change is beginning to understand what God has done for us through Jesus. And that ultimately is what discipleship is. It's gaining understanding of the work of Christ.
Yeah.
And so you had referenced Philippians 2:7, and which says Jesus emptied himself by taking the form of a servant. And so, which also made me think of 1 John 4:19, which says we love because he first loved us. And so I think when we truly are able to sit with the fact that Jesus loved us first when we were his enemy, that is where we really begin that internal change, and we really begin to almost get fired up of like, I got to tell people about this truth. I got to help free people up from this depression and anxiety or whatever that thing is that they're clinging to.
Absolutely. I do think we have a lack of gospel knowledge.
Well, 100%.
That 100%. That's why I feel like a lot of people don't share the gospel. It's because a lot of people don't know the full gospel, or they just heard it so much that Jesus loves you, he died on the cross for you, and that it's kind of been, I don't know, like it's just like softened. Like it's not as, how could I say it? It's just not as potent as it was when we first heard it, right?
Or people try to say Jesus is one of the ways. They try to like marry the religions, and obviously Christianity is like a relationship with our Creator. But you kind of touched on that a little bit in the sermon, and about like John 14:6, where Jesus says like, I'm the only way like, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
Yeah.
And so I also think people just try to act like Jesus isn't the only way.
Yeah. Well, it's just, again, they have a lack of understanding.
Right.
I remember saying, and I've heard this before, so this is not original to me, but the fundamental difference between Christianity and everything else and every other religion is every other religion will tell you, hey, this is how you get to God. But Christianity is telling you, hey, God came to us in the person and work of Jesus.
Right.
And so, like, the more we understand that you were dead in your sin, you were dead, you were not alive, like, and you needed someone to save you, right? That helps you understand, like, how important the gospel is. That the gospel is trying to tell you, you weren't like, you weren't a person who just needed help, and you weren't a person who's gonna find his way or her way at the end of your life. No, you were a person who was disconnected from God, separated by sin, literally on your way to hell, and then Jesus showed up to save you. And so when you start to understand the gospel in just a full way and understand every element of it, that's actually what happened and what God did. And that's why I love that Philippians verse, that he humbled himself, gave up his divine privileges, left heaven, stepped out of heaven to come be with us, right? Yeah. And I just think that it's crazy. And so, I think that when we start to understand that, it does make us live different, you know?
Well, and you can feel free to speak into this too, but it's so easy to tell when people have their eyes fixed on the work of Jesus compared to having their eyes fixed on things of this world.
Yeah.
And you just see the way that it whether it's the world kind of flourishing and then, I don't even know if flourishing is the right word, but like coming to the surface, and then they're just met with like all this emptiness and anger and bitterness, and whereas whenever they fix their eyes to Jesus, there's this freedom and like this weight lifted.
Yeah, well, I would say the word would be peace.
Yeah.
There's just a difference. Like, the way you navigate life is just different. And it's hard to really put that into good words, but you will, like, when you have Jesus in your life, life will be different.
Yeah.
And I can attest to that. Like, my life looks way different than my friends.
Yeah.
Right? And I know that, and then also just thinking through, like, if people say they know Jesus, but their life is like, and it's not their life, it's really how they respond to life is what's different.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people think like, oh, I've accepted Jesus, or I've surrendered my life to God, and my life isn't changing. I don't think your life will change a lot, right? Sometimes your circumstances, sometimes God moves, and like, you're no longer in that in the things that you were in, but sometimes the way you respond to it changes. Maybe when you gave your life to Jesus, the medical diagnosis didn't change.
Yeah.
But the way you responded to it now changes, because you have a hope now, you have a peace. And so I do think that you can quickly tell if someone has their eyes fixed on Jesus and when somebody doesn't. I always think of Francis Chan's book, Crazy Love, and he talks about, there's a moment, I don't know if it was in chapter 4 when he's talking about lukewarm, but there was a moment when he was at a play with his family, and his mother-in-law was there. And they were watching this play, and Francis Chan turns to his mother-in-law and says, man, aren't you happy you're here and doing all these things? And you could take, this story with a grain of salt, but I thought it was really cool when the mother-in-law turns to Francis Chan and he says, yeah, this is awesome, but if Jesus came today, I don't know if I would want him catching me here. And I was just like, man, like that is crazy to think about, that some people are actually thinking about that day that they're going to see him face to face, and everything they do is shaped by that moment.
Yeah.
And just thinking about me, like, what do I want to be doing when Jesus comes back? Like, what will he catch me doing?
Yeah. Or how will he catch me responding to things?
Yeah. So it's just, I just think it's cool to really think about that. But I also think that the world can tell. We can tell when your eyes are focused on Jesus, but then also I think the world can tell when you're focused on Jesus
100%.
too.
I literally had a phone call yesterday where someone called me, and they were just sharing some really hard things. And as I was just listening, I wasn't really saying anything. I was just letting them like get out whatever they needed to. They paused. And this is someone I haven't talked to in a really long time. And they just paused. They said, Darian, something's different. Like, you seem so much more peace-filled and so much calmer than what you used to. And it led to us being able to talk about Jesus. And like just from like her noticing my response in what she was saying, I was able to then tell her, like, well, here's why.
Yeah.
So that was really cool just to be able to have that moment with her.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's most of my Uber drives. When I used to
Uber.
drive for Uber,
Yeah.
and that's what I would do. And I would listen to people, and they would tell me their story, and next thing you know, they would ask me because of the way I responded or
Right.
the way I was listening, or I had a piece about it. They would say, like, why is it? And then that's where you give an opportunity to give them the hope that you have. And I think that's just so cool that when you spend time with God and then go and spend time with people, people will notice.
They do.
Right? And
They
then
do.
make sure you just have an answer for your faith, and make sure you know the gospel so that you could be able to share it. And that's why it's so important that you as a believer know how to share the gospel. And the cool thing is, once you share it once, it is like something that you'll just never want to stop doing.
Yeah.
You'll do it over and over and over again. So that's so cool that that person knew that there was something different. And I could tell that you have just been maturing in your faith from the first time I met you till now. You could tell that there's a drastic difference.
Yeah.
And the only thing that I could come to the conclusion is that, like, the Spirit of God has been working in your life and doing something in you.
He's been doing
you know?
work, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that's our conversation for today.
Yeah.
But just know that we love you guys, and we'll see you next episode.
Peace.